Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Saturday, which means it's time for a new FL Basics tutorial. And today we're going to be talking about the envelope controller. Also, Happy American Day. Anyway, the envelope controller is called as such because it is an envelope that controls things. But really what it is if you've ever used Citrus or Harmor, the internal way that it controls like articulating things with the envelope and then the mod XY and the keyboard mapping and all the various ways you have for controlling things are basically this thing. They were ripped out and put into a separate thing, and that's what this is. This actually did exist before FL12. However, I didn't really start using it until FL12, and it's for one very important reason, and it's because the FL12 version includes an XY mapping. You might be thinking, but there was an XY mapper just already there as a separate plugin, and you'd be right about that. But the thing that was missing was the actual act of mapping things, because while the XY controller did allow you to link controls to the XY knobs, you didn't really have a way to control things like ranges without using the actual formula inputting business on the linking page, which would allow you to do that kind of control, which for most things would still, would work. However, for more esoteric stuff, like, even like this envelope shape that we have going on here, you wouldn't really be able to do that. However, now we can. And that's all kinds of good. We'll get to that in a second, but let's talk about this exact way that the envelope controller is supposed to work. So you put it in here. And the way that it actually does work is that when you trigger it, it triggers its movement, and then once you have the controller out somewhere, you find a parameter, like say an EQ thingy, link the controller, internal controllers, and then there's all your articulators. There are 8 of them per envelope controller. I'm gonna pick on number 1 here, and then every time I hit the envelope, you can see that it's moving the thing. It even has release time, which I think is kind of neat. And you can have it do whatever you want. You can even get rid of this entirely and just, do wacky stuff. And it'll do it. And it works out nicely. Along with the envelopes, like I said, they have an LFO, a keyboard mapping, velocity mapping, mod X and Y, and then a random mapping. There's also a bunch of other fun things up there that we'll talk about in a second. I do want to point out, however, how you use the LFO. Because in my making of this video, I sort of discovered that it was a little bit awkward and it didn't really work out immediately. Because the first thought I have when I say, okay, I want to use an LFO, is I'll disable the envelope, I'll go to the LFO window and, turn it on, and then nothing at all. And it turns out it's because you actually need to have the envelope engaged so that it knows that there's a thing happening. And a very easy thing to do is just to turn it on, have one point up at the top there, and then right-click it and say sustain loop end. And then now the LFO will work if we go in here and we say continuous output. There it is. I set the bass too high though. I don't actually think we needed this continuous output. Nope, doesn't care at all. By the way, this is how you set your mid-range here. So like if you see it gets too high and it's not really doing its thing, you can bring it down, bring it in the middle, and that kind of thing. And then this is how you set the LFO intensity. You can also go inverted if you need to. You can set the tempo, you can set the global. The global setting means that it'll continue to change its position even when you're not pressing the note. So the next time you press the note, it'll play it where it's supposed to be. And then tempo is just you set the grid to the tempo so that you can tell when you set your speed that it's at the correct speed for, rhythmic control of things, which is handy. So the XY mapping is also important. So let's talk about that. I'm going to disable LFO, disable envelopes. We don't need that. I am going to put on continuous output because that's important for when we have velocity, or rather mod XY mapping, because if you want to move the knob without hitting a note, you need to have this on. Nice. Now, like I said, the strength of having this kind of interface for mapping the mod XY is not so much that we actually can map things to a knob, because we could do that even without the envelope controller, but the idea now is that we have more specific control over what the range is doing. And even this that I had just done, you could do with the formula mapping with the control linking window. But you could not do something as specific and weird as, say, this. And all kinds of other goodness. So that's a lot of fun. And so the way that you would link multiple controllers, so let's say I have that one EQ point, and I want to have this point now. I can link both of the same thing, but then they just move the same position. Really what you want to do is you want to link it to the next controller. because there are 8, if you remember. So we're going to go to Articulator 2. We're going to go to Articulator 2 in the actual interface here. Now, in this interface, there's 8 articulators, but there's still just one XY map. These are all linked to the same X and Y map. So when I do something like this, they are going to control both. And this is actually particularly nice, especially if you're going to be doing lots of like filter modulations or EQ modulations, like the example that I'm doing right now, because this allows you. Of course, now I screwed it up. There we go. If it ever locks up like that, if you ever move the parameter like yourself and then try to do it and it's not doing it, you have to like hit stop or play to disengage the automation playing point, and then it'll remember where you're supposed to be, just in case that ever happens to you. Happens to me a lot, and that's a lot of fun. My principal usage for this scenario for this is usually to use it inside Patcher. And the reason for that is that the whole time, if you're using especially the triggered things like the envelope or the LFO, that needs to be triggered separately. And there's, you know, in the sequencer, you can just put in, you know, triggers yourself, that kind of thing, or you can use a layer. And a patcher is really just a big complicated layer with some things that layers can do and some things that layers can. So that's usually how I end up using it, is inside Patcher. And if you do want to use it inside Patcher, it's probably something I should talk about. You put it in Patcher, and then you right click it, go to Outputs Controllers, and then here's all the 8 articulators that show up as control handles. And then, you know, you have a thing that makes sound, and then you got your thing you want to control, and then you come in here and say it's these 2 things, kind of like what we're doing before, and you activate, and then you link the articulator to the control that you want. And if you want to do what we just did there, we need to have 2 of them, link them to both, and then that's controlling it. This is essentially, this is macros. You're making macros. Now, there is one more thing I want to talk about that's kind of cool about, actually, there's 2 more things. One of the things I want to talk about is respaces, which you might be thinking. And this is because one of the hallmark of a respace is that there's a particular modulation and that the speed of the modulation increases and decreases with pitch. And you can set this up manually, which is to say that if you did have, on, say, this guy, you had your XY mapping set up so that the points move in a particular way and whatever, that kind of thing, like so. And then if you activate that, the actual X knob, and you come in here, and now we're going to set up the LFO. Or can we set up the LFO? I'm not totally sure. There's a bunch of different ways that this could go down. Basically, the idea is that we're going to use LFO control, and then we're going to use keyboard mapping to change the speed of the LFO. In the real world, which is to say, not inside Patcher, we might not be able to need to do this with 8, or a bunch of different things. Probably, I just changed the preset. I'm a smart person. Yeah. And I didn't save a default version of Patcher. I can't simply replace Patcher with Patcher, because if I did that, it would actually put that Patcher inside Patcher, which is not what I want to do. So real quick, I'm going to do this again. This is the entertaining portion where I screw things up, and that's for some reason funny. This is one benefit of working in the new media age on things like YouTube, because if this were the real world, which is to say, professional media, that wouldn't have gone down well. All right, so envelope, sustain loop, LFO, speed increased, gain increased. That's a little too fast. Continuous output articulator 1, link to the thing. And there we go. We have a modulation. So now I'm going to activate the speed of the LFO. I'm going to open up a new controller, and I'm going to output keyboard mapping. I'm actually going to disable the envelope on this one because the keyboard mapping will work regardless. So that's kind of like the end there. Kind of want to find the center. The way that I would recommend doing it is that you find the note, and then you make a speed that works for that note, and then that's your center now. And then have increase and decrease from that speed, and then output articulator as a control. And now when I play a note, it'll actually be faster or slower. And so now you have automatic control over the speed increase of your modulation. And that's how it would extend to doing respace kind of stuff. If you want to get extra particular, what you would want to do is you want to set up so that you have your note, and then the octave higher than that note will be exactly twice as fast. And then you would set that up, up and down, so that would be exactly what it's like to have pitch-based phase cancellation control, or what would be a normal organic res. But for the most part, it doesn't really matter because it just needs to be faster or slower, and it's fun. It's a good time. So that's pretty cool. The other thing I want to talk about is actually sidechaining. This is something I actually didn't think about until very recently, and I discovered a couple of cool things in doing some tests. Sure. I did some tests using various different methods of sidechaining. I use my regular method, which is that I have the thing that I want to have sidechain in an effect, and I use the fruity balance. The reason why I use the fruity balance for this is because it doesn't have smoothing on the actual parameter. And then I'll have an envelope controller like such. I'll just add a new one because I don't remember what I did that one. And we're actually just going to engage the envelope on, or we'll make an automation clip, but that's whatever. We're going to engage the envelope, and we're actually going to have articulator 2. Well, articulator 1. I believe it was number 2. There we go. Should be good. And much like if you were going to engage it with a ghost click, you could sort of just accept that this note, this pattern, is sort of like a ghost kick itself. At least it's pretty similarly triggered. Let's put it that way. Go there. Of course, I didn't set anything in there like it yet. There we go. Wham. Tempo. Cool. Of course, we're not saying the thing, automate, but that's just because it doesn't want to update. And so we have a particularly nice sidechaining that we have basically total control over. And that's what I like about this envelope controller method, is that we do, like, it's a little bit like using LFO tool. I've never actually used LFO tool, but I'm judging by the pictures I've seen, this is more or less what it's like. And if you want to be extra careful, where you don't want to have that clicking at the beginning there, you can actually kind of go down at the top. I, however, like to be extreme and do, like, when it is going down really hard right off the bat. And the cool thing that I discovered is that I compared audio output and recording of my usual automation clip method versus this method, and this method is actually sharper for whatever reason. So this will give you very much perfect control over your sidechaining and that kind of thing, and you just trigger it like you would any other instrument, and it's pretty handy. Anyway, that's some cool applications and more or less how the envelope controller works. These knobs up here, this is a unipolar bipolar sum, which is to say that normally if it's bipolar, the center position will be 0, and then you have plus or minus its position of the knob. So like if you have a knob that's like at a particular position, then that will be the center of that. That's what the center will mean. And then you have unipolar mode, which is to say that it's 0 to 100. This might just be a visual thing, because there are some parameters that do have a plus 100, minus 100, and there's some parameters that are just 0 to 100. So that's, if you want to switch between that. Bass controls where the middle parameter of like the knob actually is. This is basically like if the knob were to be right there, that knob controls it. And then envelope is how like the envelope itself applies to it, which is plus 100, minus 100. Here's an example of what that knob would be, a knob like that. LFO is the same thing. It's positive or negative polarity. This controls all the LFO types. Controller XY, there's really not that much, to do with like craziness in here. There's like a little test hitter up here for keyboards, that kind of thing. And then everything else about this is just like the usual average line editor for FL. You right click it to change your line type, right click to delete, click to do nothing at all. I guess you can click to actually move it around, but that's actually an LFO thing. When you can change where the polarity is. I don't believe you can do that anything else. Nope. right-click the point to point, right-click on the point, delete it. You saw me use this thing. This is the side edit tool. I may or may not have already done a tutorial on a line editor, and if I have not, then I will, and I'll explain everything I just talked about there. But if you do have any questions, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day. Have a nice 4th of July.